This is Sylviane Greensword. I am here with Dan Williams. Today is February the 12th, 2021, and we are recording for the Oral History Project with the Race and Reconciliation Initiative. Dan Williams, thank you for joining us today. We appreciate you taking the time to conduct this rather informal interview with us, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say with the vast institutional knowledge that you are bringing to this oral history project. So let's start by telling us a little bit about yourself. How did you become acquainted and affiliated with TCU?
Well, I first came to TCU in 2003, and that was after 15 years at a southern university, a southern impoverished state university, and so I was very glad to land here at TCU. I was originally in the English department, and then in 2010 I switched over to the newly formed Honors College.
Very well. What were your expectations before you joined TCU?
Well, you know, every time you move, there are push and pull factors, and there were a lot of push factors to get out of my old university, which was struggling with its past, frankly, and is still struggling. And so coming to TCU was really a kind of personal salvation for me. And I have been quite happy here overall. No university is perfect, but I have prospered and thrived during my time at TCU.
Very well. How about the demographics? Have you seen any change over time since you first joined?
Well, I can come right to the point. I am old enough that I qualify for the first vaccines, I'll say that. And so that gives me a longer view of the past and transitions and recent developments than some might have. And to me, frankly, what's happening on TCU's campus right now is remarkable. I have seen other programs like CRESS, but I have never seen a movement like DEI take hold on the campus before, as it has on ours. And I have never seen the momentum and enthusiasm for your current project, Race and Reconciliation. So I'm really glad to be a part of it in a small way. When I arrived here, students of color comprised, I think, 8% of the student population. And now today it's over 20%, and it is still starting to grow. I don't know what the original numbers were in 2003 for faculty of color, but I know that has grown quite a bit since then. The changes I see overall are a much more diverse population and a community willing to support even greater diversity. I am old enough that my parents were Adlai Stevenson liberals back in the 50s, and I grew up in the 1960s and I was a little young, but I have some memories of what was going on in 1968 especially, which was a really difficult year for the United States.
Were you in Texas then?
No, I was, 1968, I was in a Methodist boys boarding school as a young kid in Pennington, New Jersey. And I vividly remember Martin Luther King's assassination, and we weren't too far from Trenton, New Jersey, and Camden, New Jersey, and there was a great deal of unrest.
So tell me about that part. You remember that day specifically. Can you walk us through what it was like for you to experience that?
Well, this was a small Methodist boarding school, maybe 400 kids, 500 kids total, and all boarders, and the school went in lockdown.
Oh, wow.
Because of fear of unrest. And it made enough of an impact on me that I was really concerned about what was happening around me.
Did you imagine that Martin Luther King would have such an impact, such a lasting impact over time, and that institutions would embrace his message the way they are today?
I remember him as a powerful figure and an eloquent figure. It took a few years for me to get around reading letters from a Birmingham jail, which I've taught many times and had a great impact on me. So no, I could not imagine that we would have an MLK Day and a Black History Month. At that time, it was still quite binary, black and white.
Right.
And there was some suspicion on both sides. I mean, this was also the time of the Vietnam War.
Correct.
And honestly, that had a greater effect on me because I knew people who had gone to war and had come back maimed and wounded. But it was all, the unrest was all tied together.
Right.
At that time.
Right.
So you hear people today say we live in an unprecedented time, and that's true. But I can certainly draw parallels to the late 60s and the early 70s because that was an unprecedented time too. It was a time of change, it was a time of instability, and those two things seem to go together as they seem to be with us today.
That's very wise. So I'm going to fast forward to you working with the LSU Press. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you came to work with the LSU Press and what position you've had in this department?
Well, I arrived, I was recruited to be the chair of the English department, and I was chair of the English department for 6 years. And very early on, I was invited to become a member of the TCU Faculty Board of Advisors for the Press. And I enjoyed that. And about 2009, just about the time I was transitioning, the chancellor proposed closing the press. And a lot of us were quite concerned. I actually remember getting an email from June Colker, the interim director at that point. I was on my way out of town, and I was at the DFW airport. I get this long email about possibly the press closing and what could we do. And I immediately wrote the chancellor and offered all the reasons I could why having a university press was good for the university.
What was the argument for closing it in the first place?
Well, our chief financial officer really makes no distinction between a university press and a commercial press.
Oh.
And thought that we were losing money for the university. But we really don't cost the university that much. At any rate, the chancellor thanked me for my thoughts and said it is still under discussion. I offered, since the only real expense at the university are the salary lines, I offered to volunteer there for free to help it along. And the next thing I know, I get a call from June Kolker asking me to come over to her office. And I went over thinking this was just to set up some volunteer hours. And it was like 10, 15 minutes into our talk that I suddenly realized she was asking me if I was interested in taking over the directorship. And I did. I became director 2010 of TCU Press. And being a book person, I had some acquaintance, but it was a steep learning curve.
Was it? Now tell us about that.
Oh, well, I didn't know anything about the actual physical process of printing.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know a lot of the old bookmakers' terms, and so I was having to learn that. And university presses have been in a pretty great transition for the past 15, 20 years, and we're still undergoing rapid transition to new technologies, new business models, and new conceptions of what a book is. And so I immediately tried to learn as much as I could about what was happening around me. Luckily, we have a parent organization, the Association of University Presses, and their conferences and the help I got were of great importance to me. And I still reach out to fellow directors around the country and to the directors of the Association of University Presses for help whenever I can. It is a great community.
So is the digital age a threat to the more traditional way of conducting press?
Well, depends on who you ask.
I'm asking you.
Well, our chief financial officer might say that books are archaic. They're no longer needed. You can get everything you want online. But the fact is, books have been a primary tool, vehicle of information distribution for 400 years, and they're not going to go away. Mm-hmm. What's changing is the concept of a book. And books are obviously moving online. They're expanding in capacities. It's really kind of thrilling to see some of the changes. We have now what are called enhanced books, which are basically books with soundtracks, video clips. They can be interactive, where people offer feedback, and the knowledge continues to develop. Where a printed book is static, that's where the information is, and you can look it up and nothing more. But with today's books, there are threaded discussions and blogs related to books. So, you know, it's an exciting exchange. Mm-hmm. One of the concepts I'm particularly interested in is our changing concept of authorship. We usually think of the author, especially the literary author, mm-hmm. struggling in some garret at night, you know, writing by candle. That's actually a romantic notion that hasn't been around with us that long. When books started, the writer was part of a team creating a book. And I think that's what it's moving back to again, mm-hmm. Because you have so many other people contributing to books now. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's exciting to see some of these changes going on. Mm-hmm. I read on a Kindle at night for pleasure, and I think I have 400 mystery novels on it. That kind of thing was unheard of. I mean, it's just miraculous that you could have 400 books in your pocket at one time 20, 25 years ago. No. So it's exciting to see the changes.
I bet it is. Now, part of the Race and Reconciliation Initiative, part of what we do is research of text, research in the literature about TCU, the literature from TCU, the literature by TCU. And therefore, the TCU Press has been kind of a central piece for us. We want to look at how the TCU Press can help enhance and develop institutional memory.
Yeah.
Can you speak a little bit about that and how books can contain the memory, communicate the memory, share the memory,
Yeah.
and what TCU has done in that regard?
Well, one of the first things I did was reach out to Dr. G, who simultaneously was interested in talking with me.
Sure.
And we are planning a book together on the history of African Americans on this campus. And I'm sure everything you research, what you're doing right now, will go into that book. TCU Press has always been able to publish books that contribute to our understanding of our campus, our community, our region, and the state. We publish elsewhere, but primarily most of our books tend to be related to Texana and Southwestern history, literature, and culture. I have some show and tells if you're ready for me to pull them out.
I love that. So what do you have here?
Well, along the way, several books have been written on TCU's history. Some are better known than others. I would say the first book is Randall Clark's Reminiscences. It was first published in 1917. He worked on it before he passed a few years later. And it's basically his recollections of his brother Addison and their work together, and includes some nice chapters on what they did down in Thorpe Spring and their later association with TCU. It was republished in 79 and then again in 86, and we're going to republish it, a facsimile of the original edition for the sesquicentennial. And so this is really where the first book I would tell people to look at if they're interested in the history of TCU. The second book, to me, is equally fascinating. It was published in 1947, and it was written by Colby Hall. We have a Colby Hall on campus. It's not Colby Hall, but it is in honor of Colby Hall. He was a student here at the turn of the century, was a coach for one of the early football teams, and then taught classics and the Bible for a long time and became dean of the college. In 1947, he published this history, and it is kind of a hodgepodge. I've assigned it to students, and they haven't loved it, but it has some really fascinating sections, and it has invaluable information about the history of this campus. And so I really suggest people reading it. This is our reproduction of the original Colby Hall book.
Right.
We published our edition 2014. And we included a sketch of Colby Hall in the beginning.
Yeah, the 1947.
1947 was the
does not
original
have that
publication.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And we have still copies around.
There's one in the library and the special collections.
Oh yeah, every time we publish a book, 2 copies
Right.
immediately go to the library. 2 copies go to the Library of Congress in Washington, so that our books will be preserved. But yeah, if anybody's interested in the history, this is invaluable. For the centennial, 1973, TCU Press published a new history. And this one is by Dean Jerome Moore. And it was published specifically to celebrate campus for the centennial. starts out with a little history on the Clarks. And then it basically covers everyone and everything on campus up to that point, 1973. And right now, I and a group of people are writing a new history for the sesquicentennial in 2023, and we're constantly referring back to Jerome Miller's book. As you know, and I should assume anthropologists do as well, historians build on other historians.
Absolutely.
And so we look closely at what's been written about TCU before. Just to mention a couple other books, Walking TCU.
Right.
This was published by Joan Swain, who grew up around TCU and then worked here throughout her life. And she is still with us. She lives in Granbury. This was originally written in 1992. And it basically is a walking tour of TCU, building by building. The history of each building, when it was erected, why, who it was named after. And so it has invaluable information. And right now we're working with Dean Phil Hartman in Science and Engineering, who is going to update a new edition of this book.
So the campus has changed.
We have a few more buildings since 1992. This last book is one that I just discovered about a year ago, and it is a family history of the Clarks. It was published, thank God we made it, A Family Affair with Education, written by Joseph Lynn Clark, and it was, let's see, this is one of 200 copies. So
just for our audience, you may specify Joseph Lynn Clark is the grandson.
Grandson, yes. I'm not sure of which Clark. But yeah, he's a grandson of either Joseph or Addison or Randall. And so this has, I paid $200 for this copy. It's difficult to find since only 200 were printed. But it has a wealth of information about the Clark family. And it was in this edition that I first came across Charles and Kate Thorpe.
Right.
And I think they're central to the TCU story.
Absolutely. Now, as the archive team goes through the literature, and I'm glad that you're mentioning Charlie and Kate Thorpe, one of the things that is recurrent, one of the observations that our archives crew is finding is the scarcity of information about 80 Black people associated with TCU. How can we account for that?
Well, I think this is one of the burdens of our own past. My own thoughts is that there was such a distinction made at that time, a racist assumption about the different races themselves, that there really wasn't a lot of thought given. The Jarvis family, for example, were wonderfully progressive for their time, like the Clark brothers, but still racist. They could not conceive of Black and whites going to school together at that time. They simply could not. And for that reason, Ida B. Jarvis funded the original Jarvis College in Tyler, Texas, which still exists today. And I think part of our own reckoning, at least what I would like to see, is a reapproachment with Jarvis College. Because we share so many similar things in the past. It is a disciple school as well. In the 1970s, there actually was an exchange of faculty back and forth. It's about a 2-hour drive to Tyler and back, so it's not an easy commute 3 times a week by any means, but people did it. They thought it was important enough in the turbulence of the time in order to reach out. And I would personally like to see something like that take place in the future.
A couple of years before that, well, I think it was 1967, there was an actual exchange program where students from Jarvis came to TCU, stayed a week, and students from TCU visited Jarvis.
Yeah.
Now, based on the literature of the time, the students from Jarvis stayed the whole time that they were supposed to, but the students from TCU did not remain at Jarvis. Do you have any information as to why?
No, I can only speculate.
Then let's speculate.
Well, the facilities themselves were probably less than what they had here at TCU. And they might not have been comfortable suddenly being a minority when they existed throughout their lives as part of a majority. I had a good friend. He arrived in '64. He's passed now. But he took part in that exchange. And he taught at TCU for nearly 40 years before he retired. And he told me that the exchange he had with Jarvis was still one of his favorite experiences.
That's interesting. So now I'm fast forwarding in time again as we're discussing the publications from TCU Press. We're looking at narratives, works that have been published in the 1990s. How can we still account for the lack of mention of any African Americans that joined TCU? I know that there are some brief chapters about integrations of the 1960s, but very little beyond that. The photographs include very, very little mention of Black presence, to where if somebody comes from the outside, they would almost believe that it is an all-white campus when we know that it's not, because we so proudly integrated in the 1960s. Well, technically before that, but the main campus in the 1960s. So 30 years later, we would think that we would be more comfortable discussing the issue of race. What is still hindering us? Why is it such a taboo to this day?
I think it's difficult for people, really on up to our present time, to discuss race. It makes people uncomfortable. I've taught slave narratives from the antebellum period, and students can get quite interesting reading about Frederick Douglass. But if I tried to move the discussion up to more contemporary settings, this was at my old university, it was difficult for them. I hope, I believe we're over some of that difficulty right now. I really can't speak to the 1990s, but I can point to, and actually I'll give you a copy of it, an interview that the TCU Oral History Project did with Darren Turner, where he was a young kid from the Houston area and came here in the early 80s to play football. And he talks about his first image of TCU, and he frankly says, "Oh, it's a white kid's school, it's not for me." But his father pushed him in the direction of TCU because he wanted Darren to get the best possible education. And Darren came here, and he has since devoted his entire professional career helping this university. So still in the 1980s, and I'm sure for the 1990s, it is such a predominantly white school that students of color coming here, faculty coming here of color, are going to find it awkward, or found it awkward, I should say.
So what can we do to ease this transition to modern time?
Well, I think right now we have a wonderful opportunity. Again, let me emphasize that throughout my entire life in higher education, which is approaching 40 years, I have never seen anything like what is going on now. And it gives my heart the deepest hope that real change is finally here. I have seen programs come and go that promise this or that, but this university has really put full support into making these changes. And I am so proud of my colleagues in DEI. It is way past time, but yet this moment is here, and I think we cannot afford to lose this moment.
Now, some critics of programs like DEI and the Race and Reconciliation Initiative have made remarks such as, we're not racist, we don't need to document anything. Like you say, TCU has become more and more progressive. How do we start a dialogue with a population that still believes that there is no problem?
Well, as we know, people who deny they're racist most of the time are simply demonstrating that they are. That's the way that conversation goes, unfortunately. I do remember one wonderful thing from the 1960s. It's a bumper sticker slogan. If you are not part of the change, you are part of the problem. And I think we have to take that message to everyone on campus, that the time has come to be part of the solution. I think all of us, myself included, 200 years from now, people will look back at us and say, they were damn racist. But for our cultural context, we need to do the best we possibly can to help go forward so that there is no more discrimination based on superficial characteristics like skin color or religion, ethnicity. We have to involve everyone in this discussion, even the people who don't want to be a part of that discussion. If you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. There is no middle ground. You can't, and I've encountered this, instructors saying, well, I'm not political at all. And politics has no place in my class. And I really say the same thing for different reasons. Yet that denial is a political statement as well.
It is.
And you cannot be blind to the bigotry that goes on around you, especially now. So I'm thrilled with what you're doing. I just think the world of Dr. G. He's a great colleague, and I'm so glad he's on campus. And I am optimistic that a couple of years from now, let's say for the 2023 sesquicentennial, race and reconciliation can be a major part of our celebration of this campus's history and an essential part of its future.
Very good. And what part do you see the TCU Press play into that future?
Well, provided we can overcome recent budget cuts that have been difficult all across campus, but especially for the library and the press, we will keep looking for books that will disseminate information about the issues we need to address. Our mission is the dissemination and discovery, dissemination, and distribution of new knowledge and creativity. And I would love to do different books. I have approached Press and DEI and raised the possibility of a book about what's happened and what will happen. Dr. G and I are going to collaborate on this history of African Americans on campus. Right now, I think in our publications pipeline, we have 2 or 3 other books that I know will be of interest and contribute to these issues as well. So luckily, TCU Press right now has the chance to pick and choose what we publish. We still get 2, 3 queries and manuscripts a week. And some we can easily say it just doesn't fit with us. Others we look at closely. But we're always looking for books, no matter what form that book might take, that will be of relevance to our community.
Do you get a lot of proposals from African American authors?
Not enough, some. And those that we get, we look real closely with. I've been working on and off for more than half a dozen years with a woman who's writing a history about African American education in public schools from the late 19th to early 20th century. And it's difficult in some ways because she doesn't have, she's a high school teacher, she doesn't have the scholarly background, and so we work carefully to help her prepare the manuscript. And it's a time commitment. But it's one we gladly make. Another, and hopefully this will be of interest to a lot of people right now, this spring we're going to publish a book, a memoir, by a Jonestown survivor. His mother, wife, and 6-month-old child died in Jonestown, and he survived. And it was a difficult transition back to a world in America he thought he had left. And what was even worse is that Jonestown survivors were blamed for surviving because so many others, 800 others, succumbed. And I think that it is really a remarkable book because ultimately, Jim Jones, it's a book about demagoguery. And I jumped on the chance to publish it because I think it is relevant to our times.
And how do you advertise such a manuscript?
Well, we do the best we can. We don't have a lot of money to reach major glossy magazines and advertise. We can't advertise, for example, in the New York Times book review because that would cost thousands of dollars. So we have to pick and choose, and we're much more selective. But we rely on our community to help spread the word. We rely on our authors, and we try to do the best we can.
Very good. Just one last question. If you were to send a message or give a testimony to other university press, what would you tell them when it comes to racial integration, whether we're talking about documenting racial integration on campus or integrating racial integration amongst the authors that you choose to publish, or among faculty and staff in the university body? What message would you have for other universities?
to proactively seek collaborations on your campus and in your communities with people who might be able to contribute to a book, different kinds of books, different kinds of publications. Especially for university presses today, which sometimes administrators see as marginal programs. It's especially important to have the deepest roots you can on your campus and your community. To do projects together, to seek new authors, or simply to go out to different groups around and promote your books. Talk to retirees, talk to corporate businesses, but just reach out as much as you can.
Very well. This was Sylvian Greensword with Dr. Dan Williams. Today is February the 12th, 2021. Thank you, Dr. Dan Williams.
Thank you.